Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's do our prayers, then we'll start with our Gita lecture. Om Pathaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Grathitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshine Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Am Tvam Anusandhami Bhagavata Gite Bhavadeshune नमो अस्तु ते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे कुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपः परपान्न पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एकपाने ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दुग्धा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत् वसुदेव वसुतं देवं कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुं भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्रावती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सो तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रणनदी कैवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलं गीता अर्थ गंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरिकथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदे रह रह पेपिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमं वन्दे परमानंदे माधवम् यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्ति तत्कतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. We have finished 2 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 1, we saw the introduction where Arjun got grieved and he's lamenting and he's giving a lot of reason to Lord Krishna that he doesn't want to wage this war. In fact, because of all those reasons, Lord Krishna thought that he needs some wisdom, some spiritual instructions. And those instructions are in chapter 2. So chapter 1 is Vishad Yoga, chapter 2 is Sankhya Yoga. So Lord Krishna first explains the knowledge of the immortal self, highest level of knowledge. Then he reminded Arjuna of his duty as a warrior. Then he revealed a superior principle, the science of Karam Yog to him. Then he used another term, Buddhi Yoga, over there in that second chapter, that how this mind should be detached from the worldly temptations by controlling it with a resolute intellect. That is a Buddhi Yoga. And that intellect should be made unwavering through the cultivation of a spiritual practice, the sadhana. There was so much said in those 72 verses in second chapter that Arjuna almost misunderstood Lord Krishna. And that's where this third chapter starts. Arjuna says, on one hand, you are telling me that Buddhi is better, wisdom is better, spiritual practice is better. And on the other hand, you are telling me to wage this war against my guru, against my cousins, against my in-laws, against my grandfather also. I am totally confused. Please tell me, what should I do? So before we start this second chapter, you all know in our class we have Urmil Chawla ji. In her words, she has composed Bhagavad Gita, verse by verse, in poetry. And she is reciting that alongside me after about 20-25 verses. So last part of second chapter is still left for her to recite. So before I jump on to the third chapter, I would request Urmilji to please recite those verses which have been left. Thank you, Urmil.
Okay. I'm unmuted. Thank you, Harji. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And we stopped at verse 260. And I have 13 verses to finish today. So I'll start from 260 again. Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, every time he uses a different way of addressing him. And this time he says, "O son of Kunti, the senses are so forceful and effective that they can weaken the mind. Even people with a fine intellect and willpower, taming these senses, challenging they find. Those who guard and subdue their senses and absorb their mind in total devotion to me, those people get situated in perfect knowledge and engage in loving services to me." And then from 262, he talks about attachment, lust, greed, and anger, which create mental maladies. When reflecting on the objects of the senses, one gets attached to them as they give pleasure. Bond with them multiplies desires and greed. And if unfulfilled, then anger subjugates composure. From anger erupts delusion, foggy judgment, disoriented memory, and poor comprehension. With a destroyed intellect and a weakened mental strength, a man drifts in the doomed direction. But one who can control his mind and is free from the worldly attractions, attachments, and aversion, even when using the objects of the senses, that person attains the grace of God, prasadam. This grace of God brings peace and divine bliss that ends all delusions, sorrows, and sufferings. It restores perceptual intelligence, and one gets firmly situated in God, the remover of afflictions. The undisciplined person has a restless mind and senses, so he lacks a resolute intellect. When not focused on God, he cannot unite with him. No peace or happiness is its effect. The mind must control all the five senses. Easing even one of them misleads the intellect. Just like a strong wind can steer the boat away from the direction that it had initially set. Now, he talks of the benefits of the controlled mind established in divine wisdom. O Arjuna, one who can withdraw all his senses from the material world and its magnetism, and the one whose intellect grasps self-knowledge, he gets established in divine wisdom. For the sage, the ill effect of pleasures is night, and curbing the mind from enjoyments is a day. But the ignorant see lack of fun as darkness or night, and basking in worldly pleasures as day. Just as the ocean stays unruffled by the non-stop flow of water into it from many rivers merging, similarly, the sage is peaceful and calm even when the enticing sense objects are intimidating. Bliss is attained by one for whom all material desires, attachments, longings, and egoism cease. And one who renounces proprietorship, I-ness, and my-ness, he indeed attains perfect peace. O Partha, such is the state of an enlightened soul. And once attained, there is no more delusion. Even if there is God realization at the hour of death, that soul attains nirvana, the eternal liberation. Om Tat Sat. That ends the chapter.
Thank you very much, Urmil. Beautiful. Let's start chapter 3 today, Karam Yog. And if you have already studied Bhagavad Gita before, just remember that chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5, it's like they go together also, but progressively they go higher and higher. Okay, so do remember what he taught us in chapter 2. That was just a introduction to Karam Yoga. Now in chapter 3, he's going to elaborate more on the Karam Yoga. Then chapter 4 will be Gyan Karam Sannyas Yoga. And then chapter 5 will be Karam Sannyas Yoga. Okay, so just remember, take notes also. Just try to understand what Lord Krishna is saying here. And again, it's in a dialogue. And that's how the Vedic studies are done. We are always encouraged to ask questions. So that's why in these classes also towards the end, we always keep 15-20 minutes for the question answers so that we can understand it fully, what we are learning. Okay, if we understand it, only then we can move on to the next level. So let's start with verse number 1, where Arjun is showing his confusion about what Lord Krishna was talking about in the chapter 2. Jyayasi chet karmanahate mata buddhi janardhana tat kim karmani ghore mam niyojyasi keshav. Jyayasi, superior. Chet, if. Karmana, then action. Te means by you. Mata, considered, thought. Buddhi, knowledge. Janardhan, that is Arjun is using for Lord Krishna, Janardhan. And the literal meaning of Janardhan is who looks after his people. Janardhan. That means then, kim, why, karmani, in action, ghore, terrible, mam, me, ni yojyasi, you engage, keshav, that's also Lord Krishna. So Arjuna is saying, if it is thought by you, that knowledge is superior to action. O Janardhan, why then do you, O Keshav, engage me in this terrible action? And terrible action means this war. So he means to say that your arguments were supporting the path of renunciation, path of knowledge. And now you are advising me to undertake this great and terrible path of action, the war. Then the second verse also spoken by Arjun. Vya mishren iv vakyen buddhim mohayasi iv me tat ekam vad nishchite yen shreya aham apyunam. Vya mishren means perplexing. Iv, as it were. Vakyen, words, the speech. Buddhim, intellect, understanding. Mohyasi, confused, bewildered. If means as it were, me means my. That means that ekam one, vad tell, nishchate, decisively, certainly, yen by which, shreya, that means the good, the highest good. You remember those two words, shreya and preya. Preya is pleasing right now. Shreya is good in the long run. So he's asking for shreya. Aham, I, apnuyam, may attain. So Arjuna is saying that with this apparently perplexing speech, you confuse me. My understanding. Therefore, tell me that one way by which I for certain may attain the highest. Okay, so Arjun is that kind of a student, that kind of a warrior who knows that this life is for the greater path. So he says, please tell me what will take me to that highest path. First, he is confessing in the first line that I am confused because a wealth of detail was contained in the previous chapter. Lord Krishna touched upon so many areas. And Arjun was already suffering from his delusion. Even though he's intelligent man, philosophically he knew a lot, but still he could not discriminate between those subtle arguments. He could not grasp the very subtle meaning what Lord Krishna was telling him with all those theories. So that's why he said, whether the path of action or the way of knowledge will take me towards the highest path, the eternal, the infinite. So that's why his question concludes with a very humble request. Tell me that one path by which I for certain can attain the highest. So there was no doubt in Arjun's mind that life was not to be squandered away, merely producing and acquiring and hoarding and spending wealth. He knew the purpose of life is to attain that greatest. He had to fulfill a great cultural mission over here. He knew that this material success is only the means for the end. So that's why he says, please tell me which way I can attain that end. Because thinking that if knowledge is superior to action, then I should leave from here. Why should I perform this ghastly duty, waging this war? So he says, you are making a contradictory statement, sir. You are confusing my intellect. I know you are merciful. So he has a full faith in Krishna. He says, I know your desire is not to baffle me. That's why please dispel my doubt and tell me exactly what should I do. So now let's look at what Lord Krishna says. So he started his reply for these questions. Verse number 3. Lokehe asmin dvividha nishtha pura prokta maya anag Gyan yogen sankhya nam karam yogen yogi nam. Loke, in the world, asmin, in this, dvividha, twofold, nishtha, faith, path, pura, previously, prokta, said, maya, by me, anag, O sinless one. Gyan yogen, by the path of knowledge. Sankhya nam, of the Sankhyas. That means for those who are inclined towards a contemplation, thinking. Karam Yogain, by the path of action. Yogi Nam, of the Karam Yogis. In this world, there is a twofold path. As I said before, O sinless one, the path of knowledge of the Sankhyas and the path of action of the yogis. historically we find that human beings temperamentally are little different. Everybody doesn't have the same temperament. Some people can sit and contemplate, they can read, they can study. Some people, they would rather work on their body and help others with that. So Karam Yogis and the Gyan Yogi. To consider the path of action, Karam Yog, and the path of knowledge, the Gyan Yoga, as competitive is to understand neither of them. So there's no competition between these two. It's just according to your own temperament. Initially, you can walk on one path. And pretty soon you will see that there's no difference between these two paths. And they merge. So people fit for spiritual discipline, they fall under these two distinct categories. That's what Lord Krishna is saying. The active and the contemplative, if you want to call them. So temperamentally, these two classes, originally, they are wide apart. Originally. But eventually, they are the same. Both have the methods for self-development. Both. To suit the mental and intellectual temperaments of both these categories. We saw in the previous chapter, verse number 39, Lord Krishna explained that there are those who are inclined towards contemplation. Then there are those who are inclined towards action. So Lord Krishna did talk about this in the previous chapter. And he said, both these paths have existed ever since the soul's aspiration for God realization has existed. So there's nothing new, he says, I'm telling you. So his message is meant for people of all temperament and inclinations. So if somebody has a temperament of sitting and thinking and studying and meditating, but somebody else who would rather just work in this world, if they work with the right attitude, they both are going at the same place. So path of knowledge to the meditatives and the path of action for the actives. So it has been added that this classification is a very careful prescription for the two different kinds of people. And it has been in existence from the very beginning of creation. There's nothing new about it. And he clearly says that at the very beginning of creation, these two paths were prescribed by me. See, when he says Maya, Pura Prokta Maya Anag. Me. So at this point, he is talking with a perfect identification with the spiritual dignity in himself. Experiencing his absolute nature, that's the me he's talking about. He is not me talking about a body frame of me, or not the intellect of me, or not the mind of me, but the absolute in me, the Brahm in me. That's what he's talking about, that there's nothing new. And what does Anag mean? I told you sinless one. What is a sin according to this Vedic philosophy? Sin means all those negative tendencies in us. Any kind of a hurdle we create ourselves between us and God, that is a sin. So he says, you don't have that. Anag. You are a sinless one, and I'm telling you again. So by using these beautiful terms, he's encouraging his student that I have told you before, I'm telling you again, Please listen to me carefully. So at the very beginning of creation, these two paths were given out by me. So there's no new theory he's creating over here. He says people have forgotten it. They get confused just like you have gotten confused. These are the two possible methods by which active and the contemplative could seek to rediscover their absolute nature. So the goal is there, the paths are there. It's up to us to know our temperament and which path to walk on. And do not get deviated from the path or from the goal also. Okay, let's look at what he says in next verse. Na karam naam anarambhyat nash karmyam purusha ashnute na cha sanyasnat ev siddhim samdhi gachati. Na means not karam naam of action. Na rambhat by non-performance. Okay, rambhat, like not doing, by abstaining from. Nash karmyam, freedom from karmic reaction, like actionlessness, like a nishkam karam. That's nash karmyam. Purushaha, a person, ashnute, attains, reaches. Na means not, cha means and, sanyasanat, from renunciation. Ev means only, siddhim, perfection, samdhi gachati, attains. Lord Krishna is saying, not by non-performance of actions does a person reach actionlessness. Person says, I don't want to do any karam, and I'm becoming a renunciate. He says that's not how it works. So not by non-performance of actions does a person reach actionlessness. So we need to reach actionlessness, but it's not by not doing something, and nor by mere renunciation does he attain perfection. Okay, the whole philosophy is given in these two lines over here. Through right action, we have to get a complete purgation. See, we got to purge our vasanas, of the existing vasanas, which we have gained through past actions. So doing the actions properly, we attain the actionlessness. Not by, I'm not going to do any action. So the path of action is the only process by which an ordinary dense mind and intellect can be made knowledge worthy. And we are talking about the ultimate knowledge also. By abstaining totally from actions, one cannot reach the supreme goal of actionlessness. Okay? So spiritually, every one of us is perfect. Spirit in us is perfect. There's no flaw in it. It's not big or small. It is the same. So that's why in the first line, he's talking about the Karam Yogi. In the second line, he's talking about the Sankhya Yogi. So as a Karam Yogi, you must learn to work without any attachment to the fruits of actions. That's what he told us in the first chapter, the second chapter. So this requires cultivation of knowledge in our intellect. And the Sankhya Yogi cannot attain the state of knowledge merely by renouncing this world and becoming a monk. True knowledge cannot awaken as long as mind remains impure. You can sit in meditation all you want. You can go into the caves. You can go into the jungles. But if the mind is not pure, the true knowledge is not going to get awakened. So that's why the Yogi Guru says, we must do the action that purifies the mind and intellect for the success in the Sankhya Yoga. So it's almost like a devotion without philosophy is only a sentimentality. And philosophy without devotion is intellectual speculation. So action as well as knowledge, they both are necessary for most of us. We cannot be just on one path exclusively. So we keep on purifying our mind, and with our body, we just keep on doing our duties and learn to do our duties without getting attached to the fruits. And when we are walking on this path, then all these words which he's mentioning over here, they become very clear to us. It is very well known that we desire things that are not already with us in full. So as the desires in us, so are our thoughts. And those thoughts are the one which disturb us. So at every moment, the texture and the quality of our thoughts are directly cultivated, and they are conditioned and controlled by our desires. So whether we are walking on the Karam Yog path or in a Sankhya Yog path, we got to watch for our desires. What are they saying to us? If we observe even a little, we will see that so many different factors, they are working in our personality. And all those factors are just creating more and more ignorance in us. So by staying on the path, whether it's a Karam Yoga path or a Sankhya Yoga path, Gyan Yoga, Sankhya Yoga means Gyan Yoga path, we got to look at, am I removing my ignorance or not? The avidya. And avidya or ignorance about my, who am I? That ignorance. Because when this avidya, when it functions in the intellect, it expresses it as desires. So higher the avidya, more the worldly desires. When the desires which are nothing other than the ignorance functioning in the mind, they express as thoughts. So if we have a lot of thoughts, we cannot control our thoughts. Constantly our mind is churning. No matter what we are doing, there's some dialogue going on inside. That is because of the ignorance again. And when these thoughts, they express in the outer world, what are those? Actions. I am doing it. I want to do this. I have done so much. I haven't done enough. Action, action, action. So that's why we hear these words, whether it's a sanyasanat or nash karmyam, these words. There got to be a silence in our mind, not too many thoughts, reduction of the material desires. And even while doing the action, actionlessness. That is a movement towards the right place. So that's why the state of desirelessness, the condition of thoughtlessness, or the life of actionlessness, these are the terms we often read in the scriptures. It's not that you are not doing anything, but a life of actionlessness. So by mere renunciation of action, no one attains perfection. That's what he's trying to tell us. Running away from the life is not the way to reach the highest goal of evolution. So through action to a purification of the inner instrument, applying the knowledge which we learn and living the life according to our duties. Then he says, Na hi kinchit kshanam api jatu tishtati akaram krit karyate hi avshaha karam sarvaha prakriti jai gune. This is verse number 5. Na means not, he means indeed. Kashchit, anyone. Kshanam, a moment. Api means even. Jatuhu, verily or ever. Tishtati, remains. Akaram, krit. Without performing the action. Akaram krit. Karyate, performs, is made. He means certainly. Avshaha, helpless. Karam is action. Sarva means all. Prakriti jaya, born of Prakriti. And Prakriti is this material nature. Guna hai, by the qualities. And the gun qualities means sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. Verily, none can ever remain, even for a moment, without performing action. Why? Because everyone is made to act helplessly, avshaha. Indeed, by the qualities born of Prakriti. Okay, so we are a combination over here of the Prakriti and the Purush. Purush is the Atma, the soul. Prakriti is the rest of us. And this Prakriti part make us act. If we say, no, I will not get up. Hey, you're either sitting or sleeping. That's action too. Your Prakriti is doing the action. You say, I'm not going to speak. You are trying not to speak. That's an action too. And you're thinking also. You're breathing also. All those are actions. All actions performed with the body, mind, tongue. They say manasa, vacha, and kaya. Okay, with the mind, body, and speech. These are all actions. So this is what he is declaring over here. He says a human being in the human body cannot help themselves. We cannot say that I am not going to act. Inactivity is an impossible state to reach. Because sleeping is also activity. And during our sleep, we are dreaming. That's an activity too. Okay. So verily, none can ever remain even for a moment without performing action. For everyone is made to act helplessly, indeed, by the qualities born of the Prakriti. Sure, we can do the sattvic action or rajasic action or tamasic action. Those are the qualities. So we are under the influence of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So even for a single moment, you cannot remain totally inactive. Not to act at all is to disobey the laws of nature, actually, which will bring about a cultural deterioration, according to our saints. In ourselves also, in the society also. because that will be the laziness, that will be the inertia, that will be the tamsikta. So that's why in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna advises us to act vigorously with the right attitude of mind so that we may avoid all internal waste of energy and learn to grow in ourselves. We'll see that how he elaborates on this further in the following verses. So let's stop it here today and we'll go through some dialogue because I'm sure you might have a lot of questions, a lot of comments to make. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnase Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much. So let's go through some question answers and then